creation to be.
Because I'm realizing that you guys are turning away from this microphone. Oh, okay. So anybody that's talking is
Can't hear.
can't hear. So and Mark needs to hear all this stuff. Yeah, go ahead and say that again.
No, I was saying that, I guess it's verse 30, 31, that, everything that he made, he saw and thought to himself, it is good. In other words, he was happy, meaning to me that he created everything the way he wanted it to be. There was no mistakes, no errors, no compromises.
Well,
There's a moral component to that as well.
what?
The moral component to that as well.
Explain that.
So when he says it is good, not only is it everything that Harlan said, but it's also the fact that goodness is one of God's attributes. So he's not going to be able to create anything that is bad. And so if it's good, it is good all the way through. It's good physically, it's good mentally, it's good spiritually, it's good morally, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good. He said it's perfect. It's just kind of drawing that perfection out a bit. So that's important for us to, at least for me to understand when I visit with people who don't think that this earth is good and there's nothing good about it. No, sin is what has affected this, but God has created something that was not only good, but at the very end, he said it's very good. Right? A little bit of emphasis. And so this is a good place that has been marred by sin. And sin's the problem, not the creation.
And I think that's important because when you listen carefully to some people talk about how bad things are in this world, there's kind of this implication that maybe God made a mistake in his creation, that he created something out of his control. Well, the thing is, in a way, it is out of his control in the sense that he gave us the free will. That's what we talked about last week too. So in other words, we get to choose.
But as far as what he has done, it is moral. Everything's it's morally good. And that's right.
True north. Absolutely compass.
Yep.
Good in all ways.
Yep.
And when you think about it, again, think about the fact that this earth tilts and to create the seasons so that you have a life cycle of these green plants that then go to seed and begin again. And that you have this ability to hold somewhere between the gravity of the sun and the gravity of the moon and the gravity of the other planets that create this perfect space that doesn't allow us to drift closer to the sun where we burn up or draw stuff away. I mean, if you take something and spin something, centrifugal force will cause it to move away from it. But somehow the gravity of the sun allows us and draws us such that there's perfect balance, and then it tilts and does its thing. I mean, you can go on a long time thinking about how all that works, and it becomes extremely, to me, becomes very awesome to consider.
Yeah. Well, that's what they're saying on the science side. That's what they're saying. You know, if this earth was tipped a degree or even less than that anyway, or it was just a little bit away from where it would be, life would exist. So to be able to do that for billions of years and stay on course without any, shifts is incredible.
Well, the fact that we have a table that's being held together by molecules is pretty petty.
Sure does.
I mean, just one molecule off and we wouldn't have a table.
And what's holding those molecules together to make a solid surface that you can set your stuff on. Absolutely. Well, let's move on.
It just was a big bang, that's all.
Well, how he did it, we don't all know. But it's to say it's simple is probably not accurate. All right, who wants to read for a little bit, starting with verse 4? Harlan, would you do it since you're kind of in the middle of the table? I want to point out something. Because I said this is the detailed story. This is the voice. This is their interpretation. Now, we've had the first explanation that we started with the first chapter. If we start with the first one, now we're moving to a more detailed, what they would interpret as a detailed explanation. We're going to get some of the nuances. But again, this is a time in our society before Moses was born. He's now writing this down. But this came orally. It came from oral traditions of people passing it down. And this is now where he's starting to explain some of the things that he's learned or he's heard.
So before I don't know if you all read the preface of this book. It's like 2 or 3 pages. Read it because it's exactly what I did on my journey of ancestry.com. Is you start, talk to a relative, and then you dive in deep. So that made all this just kind of click in my brain a little bit better, that Moses kind of goes over the generalities, and then you dig into finding that you were related to that person, that were related to this person, and that's what they did. And
did you know I'm related to Abraham Bloomer, who helped hide? He was pastor of a congregational church that hid the Liberty Bell under the floorboards of the church.
You know what? My relatives might have known your relatives. Because we were back, we were in the Philadelphia area at that same time.
We were very good at lying.
Mine was on the other part.
No, I haven't seen that. I don't know what the bell is. I haven't seen that bell. Okay, go ahead.
All right. This is the detailed story of the eternal God's singular work in creating all that exists. On the day the heavens and earth were created, there were no plants or vegetation to cover them. Fields were barren and empty because the eternal God had not sent the rains to nourish the soil or anyone to tend it. In those days, a mist rose up from the ground to blanket the earth, and its vapor irrigated the land. One day, the eternal God scooped out dirt of the ground, sculpted into the shape we call human, breathed the breath of life that breathes the breath that gives life into the nostrils of the human, and the human became a living soul. Now,
Go ahead and read the note. Yeah, go ahead and read the note there from, and this is from the Voice and from their committee that puts this translation together.
It's kind of an aside. When human body meets divine spirit, soul is born. Divine breath and sculpted earth come together to make up a living soul. For thousands of years, philosophers and theologians have posed the question, what is a human being? Here God gives the answer. The eternal God planted a garden in the east in Eden, a place of utter delight, and placed man whom he had sculpted there. In this garden, he made the ground pregnant with life, bursting forth with nourishing food and luxuriant beauty. He created trees, and in the center of this garden of delights stood the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
So note there are 2 different trees. 2 of note. One is one that gives life forever. The other one is the tree of good and evil.
we don't talk much about the 2 trees.
You know, it's always referred to as tree.
That is a correct observation. One tree, we were allowed the tree of life so that they could live forever. But the one tree that they were not allowed, of course, is the one we discussed the most. Go ahead.
A river flowed from Eden to irrigate the garden, and from there it separated into 4 smaller rivers. The first, Pishon, flows around the land of Havilah, a land plentiful in gold of premium quality, bdellium, and onyx stones. The second, the Gihon, flows around the entire land of Cush. The third, the Tigris, flows east of Assyria, and the fourth is the Euphrates. The eternal God placed the newly made man in the Garden of Eden in order to work the ground and care for it. He made certain demands of the man regarding life. So, the crown of God's creation is a new creature, a creature that can sound the heartbeat of its creator. That creature, made male and female, reflects God's own relational richness. The human family is to join God in the on-point work of creation. The earth below and the sky above, with all their inhabitants, plants are too beautiful and too good to be left alone. They need the tender care and close attention of God that only God's favorite creature can give. God. Eat freely from any and all trees in the garden. I only require that you abstain from eating the fruit of one tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Beware, the day you eat the fruit of this tree, you will certainly die. It is not good for man to be alone, so I will create a companion for him, a perfectly suited partner. No, after God gives man this directive, he realizes something is missing.
Let me ask you this before it goes on. Do you think that means that God somehow is thinking this was a mistake? That the first creature, the human, as we said, Adam, as we read in the Hebrew, a lot of times the emphasis on the second syllable, that this human is somehow a mistake? Well, David was saying God doesn't make mistakes. So what does that put us into? The fact that he looks at it and says, now I'm going to do something different. Why would God do that? Why would he do it and create two in the first place? This is just hypothesis on our parts, conjecture. Say again, please. Incomplete. Why would he start incomplete? Well, what's another way to explain this? Would you be more comfortable too if we left our masks on too?
Oh, no, I'm fine. It's keeping me.
Okay. We're all vaccinated, just so you know.
We are too.
What were you going to say, Colleen?
Sorry. I was just going to say, like you said, it's
I think that's wrong. I think you're right. I think in this, it's a special presentation. I think it could be argued that this was set up in such a way as a teaching lesson. And many times when God does something and stops and pauses in the middle, it's for us to take note of the pause, because the pause, the Sabbath, the whole cause in the moment teaches us something so that we take note. It's like you're on a trip and you stop midway so that you say, okay, how far am I on this trip? So I take note of it. So we get to this place where there's one creation, and he says, take note. It's incomplete with only one. It needs this creation, this caregiver for creation needs two. And as I said last week, I think, and again, I'm a musician, so the artists are the ones that I've been saying that we're the ones that say everybody get on the same side of the table, so everybody's paint a picture of the Last Supper. You know, we're the ones that put everybody. Or when we paint a picture of Jesus, he always looks up looking like us rather than looking like a Middle Eastern person. You know, we make them to look a whole lot more beautiful than probably Scripture seems to say, because we try to add too much to it. And I could be adding too much, but I say that it's incomplete to think that just a small portion of man, the rib, was taken, and that's how he made woman. That I think it's probably a better, as Tim Mackey seems to understand or argue, that the creation was human, and I'm going to take a portion of that human to make male and female. And the two are very different, but two complement each other quite significantly in so many ways. When you think about it, the differences, not just in between like me and Colleen because of personality, but there are things that are just drawn to that's in her spirit that just feels like it's almost a part of her DNA. And then there are other things that for me as a hunter, a protector, that just come out in my own spirit. And it's pretty much in most men, certain attributes in most women. Now we can make a lot of jokes about that. That's easy to do. But if you pause for too long and think about it, you realize that there are a lot of differences that seem to complement the two. You want to start? Yeah.
Yeah, just a couple things real quick. I find it, I've always found it very interesting that God in verse 17 would say, where is it here? I had to get this out to. He says,
Eat freely from, I only require that you abstain from eating the fruit of one tree. That's verse 17. 2:17.
17, yeah, see, mine, this is where I'm a little ripping here. It says, oh no, it's not 2:17, 2:18. He says, it's not good for man to be alone. And right at that point, man is alone, and he declares that. And then I love the way that Adam has to go through that self-discovery to figure out that, oh yeah, what he said is true. Because in the very next, we haven't read this yet, that's why I was it's been a while since I read it, but he says, not out of the ground, the Lord formed every beast of the field. And he said, okay, Adam named these, and he named them. And then at the very end, it says in verse 20, but for Adam, there was not found a helper fit for him. So Adam came to this realization after everything was created that there's nobody like him. That he needed that companion. And so he is realizing, oh yeah. And I think there's times that, there's a pattern now that's up here that oftentimes God will say something, and we're not quite sure what that means, but when we go through the experience, not through the experience, like, oh, no, I get it. Right? And I think that and I might be going a little too deep there, but it just seems like a literary pattern he's forming that he's going to declare something, and we're all a little mystified, like, why would you say that right then and there? And then there's a point of discovery, and then a point of affirmation afterwards. Like, oh yeah, that's right. And then secondly, on what I just wanted to dovetail, because Tiffany and I were having a discussion today. We went to church today, and the part of the sermon was fear, and the way that over the past 18 months, there's just this aura of fear that's just been
Because of the pandemic.
or politics, or it doesn't matter what it is. It's just, and wherever you turn, whether I love the way the pastor said this, whether you're red or blue, whichever news outlet you look, each one's casting fear in some and how fear grips us and enslaves us. And so on the way home, we were talking, and I'm like, if we ever go through something like this again, I think I'm gonna look at things a bit differently. I'm not gonna be so fearful. And she was like, well, wait a second, what about da 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 da? And we started talking about it. I'm like, okay, not that exactly we came to a happy medium, but if I didn't have full perspective on that, I'd be like going full throttle this one direction. But now that I have my wife's perspective on it, it's like,
Let me guess.
Oh.
She's thinking about the children and the grandchildren. And
well, she's just thinking from the public health standpoint.
okay, as a doctor.
As a doctor, public health standpoint, that it wouldn't be good. Because either way.
And it is part of God's purpose.
Oh,
I mean, we
absolutely.
could just,
Yeah.
it feels that way, seems that way.
Yeah.
But
No, that's
There's,
exactly right.
there's reason behind it.
You're exactly
That
right.
makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, because in the very beginning, he says there that something's missing. Well, what's missing from the man? Well, it's perspective that a woman would have, right? What's missing from it's the compassion, or it's whatever complements, and vice versa, the man to the woman. I mean, we would awesome if it was just one, it was just unisex.
Considering you made all the animals. Not unisex. Well, the one thing that I think that it is confusing, and it is, especially when we've been looking at this one. In the first part, in the first chapter, we had the macro, and God created man and woman. Now in the second chapter, he goes back now and he breaks it all down in a way, before, we would assume when you just read it, right? And what's the one, 127 that says, so created man, own image, and he created them, male and female, he created. It's like, oh, I've already thought about all that. This is the way I created. Whereas this one, he's kind of going back, he's actually kind of detailing this creation process, and you say, well, I created this, and then, what I thought, like, so it's all in that whole process. It's just that you kind of foreshadowed that one chapter, and then it came down and broke it up. Well, if you're reading like we are, wait. What happened? Did he say that in the beginning? Or did he came back and said, well, maybe I made a mistake? No, that was his, it's a process.
Yeah.
Right, it's a process. And I'm sure that probably he did the same thing with the birds and the fields and all this other stuff. Like, that's the way it's reported. So anyway, just.
And you're right. And there are a lot of things that aren't recorded that definitely happened.
Look, the thing is, again, when you remember, I think the thing that keeps me kind of grounded on this is that, the Bible is, it's a history book, but it's not an Excel. Basically, it's revealing God's nature. So this is just talking about his ability to create, his sovereignty, and all this other stuff. And it isn't meant to be a blow, Grey's Anatomy, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I would tell you too, what you just talked about the animals. And again, this is the musician I'm creating. I think originally the fellowship was between God and the human. And then God said, I'm going to show something. No, but we do have a relationship with him, but it means a lot to me that I can hear Colin's voice. And I listen for God's voice, but it's not near as audible. Again, this is the sort of thing that's just real easy for jokes, because we think about all these things, the differences that are there. That's one of the reasons why they're funny. But really, I don't hear God audibly like I hear my wife. And while I think that ideally I would, but I don't. And so there's a need for man to have a compliment. And that's one of the reasons why he went on and took it the next step.
Yeah, I was going to say that sometimes you may be hearing Colleen's voice, but it's God speaking through her.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. But not always. I couldn't resist. I'm sorry.
With that.
Molly, do you have any insight as a therapist into marriage and that sort of thing?
Well, I was just gonna say, that when it says it's not good for the man to be alone, I think I'm a little biased because I am a marriage and family therapist, but I think that throughout the passage God says us, me, and then for man to be alone, that doesn't actually make him the pinnacle of creation if he's not reflecting God as a relational creature.
I like that.
That's good.
That's really good. That's really.
Say that again. With that, I can't quite hear you from down here. I'm sorry.
Not necessarily that none of us we need each other. And so I think it's not really a woman to be alone.
Right, so you create another woman because we're better communicators. Sorry, you can just wipe that out.
Put a note, whatever that, at this point. Go ahead.
That's what I was thinking. If I could talk to somebody else,
It's true. It's true. It's true. Yeah, talking about. Well, let's pick it up then at. Just read this last little bit, starting with verse 21. So the eternal God put him into a deep sleep, removed a rib from his side, and closed the flesh around the opening. And he formed a woman. My argument is it's human, and then he basically never made and was very definitive man and woman. Adam speaking, at last a suitable companion, a perfect partner, basically a perfect couple.
Where are you?
Yeah, where are
Verse
you?
23.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was up at 19.
you did.
Yeah.
Okay, I shouldn't say.
Yeah, it's all right.
So out of the ground, the man was made from the eternal God, sculpted every sort of animal and every kind of bird that flies up the sky. Then he brought them to the man and gave them authority to name each creature as he saw fit. Whatever he decided to call it, that became its name. Thus the man chose names for domesticated animals, birds, and wild beasts, but none of these creatures was a right and proper partner for Adam. And that the authority to name something is uniquely to humanity. The name is to share in God's creative act. So the eternal God put him into a deep sleep, removed a rib from his side, and closed the flesh from around the opening, and he formed a woman from the rib taken out of the man and presented to her. And then Adam speaking, at last, a suitable companion, a perfect partner, bone from my bone, flesh from my flesh. I would call this one woman as an eternal reminder that she was taken out of man. Now, this is the reason that a man leaves his father and his mother and is united with his wife, and the two become one flesh. In those days, the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. And I often remind people that, shame is one of the first emotions that came after from the tree of knowledge when they looked at each other and realized that they were naked. The first emotion that came as a consequence of sin was shame. And God uses our ability to work through that in a close relationship with Him. And then Satan continually brings it back to us to draw us back into the emotion of that sin and realize, I did that, I shouldn't have. And we constantly wrestle with that, the shame of our sin. Let's skip, rather than review. How do you respond to the idea that God has made you unique and different from any other part of His creation? What do you think about that? That God made us different to be the caregiver of the world.
Well, I said last week, I think it's kind of good little ideas that we have free will and choice.
Anybody else?
I think what stood out to me through the verses is the responsibility that we have because of that. God gave us authority. He talks about the plants being the ongoing nourishment. It's not a one-time thing, but they're there to be cared for. All the stewardship that we have to provide over because we have responsibilities that the rest of creation doesn't have to care for.
If you're the curator of a museum, does that, shouldn't that be part of your responsibility? You've got a responsibility for what goes on there. If you're the owner of that restaurant, if you're the shepherd of that flock, time and time again, it puts us in a place of responsibility that we need to live up to. What are some of the attributes that God has placed in you that set you apart? You mentioned that already. One is self-will. What are attributes?
Opposable thumb.
Jennifer said that last week. Jennifer Lane mentioned that we have an opposable thumb. That's exactly the exact example she used. Yep. I'm sure you do. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to last more than a week in what you do.
True statement.
Yeah, absolutely.
True statement. So I might be reading too much into this. Is it set apart from creation or set apart from each other to where he's given us gifts? Or it could be either. Or
It's Max Lucato's question.
Right, right.
And I
So-
think that probably, you could take it either way, but I think it makes it interesting, and like Colleen was saying,
Yeah.
she's unique. When I look at Einstein, he's really good at a therapy dog, but your phone, Aspen, I knew it was Colorado. I was going to say it's Southern Colorado. All right, so Aspen could be a good therapy dog too. Yep. There are probably quite a few dogs that could be therapy dogs if they were trained. Right? Not everybody can be a family and marriage therapist. Not everybody can be a third-grade teacher. There was very specific, I remember, that the difference between a first-grade teacher and a second-grade teacher was volumes. Now, to somebody that doesn't know any better, you say, oh, they're very, so actually, if you know much about teaching, you realize there are very different personality traits in a first grade teacher and a successful first grade teacher. So I think that we take this to begin to look at how uniquely, how much more complex we are as God's caregivers, then you start to get kind of excited about, well, when God weaved me in my mother's womb, as the psalmist talks about, you begin to realize how different and uniquely made we are for this time, this place, with all these kinds of things. And then it gets pretty exciting, pretty interesting. How do you think God's made you unique?
Well, I'm sitting here mourning because I felt for many years that I was uniquely gifted to do the things I did in my career, and to have some ones who did not know me, didn't really even have time to know what I did, to pull that rug out from under me. It's been very difficult and painful. I mean, forget all the other stuff of, oh gosh, we gotta look for insurance, we gotta look for a job, we gotta think about Social Security, gotta think about. No, it was such a loss to me, personally and emotionally. I mean, obviously, I'm still wrestling with it.
I would say that you knew your uniqueness and where you belong. It's a little hard to take when someone who probably was not or did not have an understanding of what you were to do with your life, as much as you understood it, came and just pulled it over. I think that's but you know what the thing is that now God is giving you a direction. You're excited about it. You're a little apprehensive about it, but you know what?
But it still hurts when you realize that they didn't really even know you when they said, we're going to get rid of that position. How does that leave you? Because you're really just a few months ahead of her. When you were in a position and they said, you know what, we have 3, we're going to go to 2. You're the odd man out. Goodbye.
Yeah.
He lost his job too.
Yeah.
Of sorts.
Yeah. So for me, I have always looked at every position that I've ever had as a building block for the next one. So for a while, it was like, okay, what's next? Is it continuing to do what I've been doing the past 14 years, learning a different area? Is there something that you've taught me in experience and skills that I've developed over the past 14 years? Now I can begin to aid others, in addition to the skills and experiences I had in corporate, including in college, high school, elementary school, all this stuff is just build and build and build and build. And so for me, it was never grieving as you it was okay, what's next? I'm not quite sure. And over time, he revealed what that next thing was. And I'm in that space now. And if my wife was sitting here, she would say, wow, I think you're really gifted for what you're going to do. And I think this could be like your life for the rest of your life. I think you could be doing this. And I think you could have a greater impact where you are today than where you were 18 months ago. Now, I don't know. That's just, I look at things in like seasons of life. And so this is like a new season for me. I don't know if it's going to last another 6 months or another 20 years. Because over time I've learned that, wow, I thought that this was it, but it's not. But look, it's just another season. And so, yeah, so, and then I've also discovered, and I've had to be humbled in this a number of times, that as soon as I thought I was sure of something, I got to be very, very prideful and arrogant. And God would say, okay, I'm going to take that thing that it has become an idol to you. I'm going to remove it. I'm like, oh, wait a second, don't do that. Don't do that. I'll dial it back. It's like, nope, too late. You need to learn. Okay. So I've been able to hold on to things in a looser manner than I was when I was younger, because I've had to go through those experiences and realizing that I'm not as hot as I thought I was in whatever I was doing.
Are you familiar with the term, I'm going to box your ear? You know what that is?
What's that mean?
Well, my grandfather would talk, it's basically taking your ear.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It hurts.
Yeah.
It hurts. And my grandfather would talk about, Methodist minister would talk about, I'm going to box your ear. But basically that's what God's been doing to me. Yeah. But I would hypothesis, conjecture, is that it's also a part of our, a bit more of a male DNA to say, you didn't take it personally, she took it very personally.
Yeah.
There's a difference between, and it doesn't mean that she should be more like you or you should be more like her. That's where you learn from each other. That's correct. And you realize that what she's saying is you're supposed to agree, I think.
Yeah.
And learn and learn something as God's teaching you through this. It would be our nature to try to say, but I want to be more like that. Then that also leads to humility, leads to an arrogance and some other issues that you don't want to be a part of. So finding that perfect balance where God is teaching you and leading you through this time to find out and say, but you know what, really, I'm a compassionate person, and I'll find a way to be compassionate. For me, maybe it's easier to talk about because I don't play my trombone anymore. Music was very important to me. Moving to a condo meant that I had to give up, but I'm still extremely relational. And so I use it now as a way of talking to the ASU students and people in the community, as opposed to using it for my music. I'm still who God made me to be. I've discovered that now there's a different outlet for the way to use that.
I can think of a way that you can make new contacts and get the conversation started. Start your trombones back up again in your contact.
Oh, yeah, that would do. Well, that is true.
And just to dovetail, and maybe just bring this to full circle here. I think what God wants to do in each of our lives is different and unique. And he's like, got us on all individual journeys. And we're going to come across pain in our lives. And so the question then becomes, okay, how is he going to restore me? And he's going to restore us differently because we're different. And we have different personalities. We have different DNA. Some things are going to bother some people more than others. And vice versa. There's some things that really get me that don't get other people.
Your experiences, you've been fired before.
Yeah.
You never have.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I had, but not like this.
But
Just to add on what Terry said, I think tying into it, three, when he talks about Adam was able to name all the creatures, and that's a unique quality of human beings, taking that and extrapolating a little bit, we as humans tell stories, and God tells stories through us. And so I think some of it kind of ties into the three, some of the attributes that God places in us and sets us apart. The stories we tell ourselves about, the stories we allow to be absorbed by us, and are unique, a unique part of our
That is true. That's right.
humanity, and that can be good or evil, depending on what.
Well, and our DNA, because it's interesting. I don't. It was a couple of weeks ago after a Sunday. My very business, financial minded husband said to me, you know, basically he was commenting on, you know, don't talk so much about your job loss because, you know, we still have our home, we have, you know, all these financial things we still have, and the comfort the creature comforts we still haven't been taken away. But for me, in discussing it, it's an emotional loss of my identity, who I have been as a nurse. So it's just, you're absolutely right in what you're saying as far as the DNA determines how we're going to function. You know?
It feels like one of the things I asked Harlan, aside from you, when a lot of this happened, I said, I know you well enough. I know you have plans. You're getting close to retirement. I know you've got some plan B. And he said, absolutely. So you're right. You know, it was kind of like, if you talk about too much, it sounds like Harlan didn't do his responsibility in planning for your, well, he has. But at the same time, emotionally, this is totally unique to you to be so.
Well, plus I was lied to
Sure.
by several. So,
That's the worst.
Yeah.
you know,
I sensed it coming.
my new boss said, trust me. You know. Yeah. So, anyways, enough about.
Well, yeah,
Enough
I mean,
about
so
me.
sorry. But see, that's the thing, our uniqueness. God kind of sees. I mean, I remember for me growing up, obviously, you know, when you're in the restaurant business, since you were, you know, as far as you can remember, the last thing you were doing. So you had all these dreams, right? You know, I guess it was about sophomore at that time. You know, I kind of realized I didn't want to go into medicine like my brother. And of course, you were already in medicine, so it's kind of like, okay, you know what? I think I want to be a lawyer. And I told mom and dad that. Jim, I don't know whether I told you the story. Both of them laughed.
No.
They go, "You're never going to be a lawyer." I mean, thanks, man. Because you know what? They knew my nature. Because you know what? The old saying, "I cannot tell a lie." I was that kind of kid. You know, if I knew something that was a lie, I'm gonna go, no. That's not what he's about, right? I could just see me defending a defender, right? No. Okay, if he's just going to say. But you know what? I never really saw that. And so for me, I was just kind of plugging along until literally it was November, around November, and I applied to law school. And there were very few. South Texas College of Law was one of the only ones that accepted second semester. I mean, midterm. So that, and then my other one was Baylor. So I got accepted. And, you know, Dad, as he always was, never forced us to do anything. So I didn't really mean that. That's what you need. That's where you want to go. Then you need to follow God. That's basically what it is. But you know what? After coming back and thinking about it, I'm kind of, you know, a couple of years ago, you were right. I realized I could go into some other areas of law, right? But you're still going to have to go through that part of it to get there. And I just, you know, hooray for those things. Like Aaron, you know, he seems like he wants to do stuff, but for me, it just didn't. And so that's when I, you know, did tell him, you want that? I think I'm going to stay in the business because you know, I think about allow me to continue this, or allow me to continue for another 30 plus years. So, you know, it's just, again, I look back now, we traded for the money. I mean, did I enjoy it when I was in the middle? Oh, but you know what, if I was a lawyer, I'd probably be in the middle of something that I would.
That's not, it doesn't matter where you are.
It doesn't matter.
You're,
So,
when you're in the suit, you're in the suit.
I think that God gave me a unique skill and a unique, not only that, but he had a unique plan for me. It's just that he helped me to make me realize it until November. Because I had to go and basically tell South Texas College Law that I accepted, somebody else doesn't. That's not fair. So anyway, so that's where I am on that as far as uniqueness is concerned. I think that proposals don't get wrong, more unique in other ways.
Aren't we all? Yeah, for good purpose. All right, let's end with this question number 4. Why do you think some people try to suppress the likeness of God within others?
Within others or them?
Than others.
Within others.
The
Is
book
what,
says within them.
well,
I mean, it's very different.
it could, well, that's the Kindle edition. I don't know which came first, Kindle or the hard print. I'm sorry. All right, well, you answer it within them. Why do you think people try to suppress the likeness of God within themselves?
Oh, everyone's looking at me.
No, I'm just thinking.
Well, I thought you wrote down the answer.
No, but
Okay.
so
What's that?
So I never thought about it before. Like, how would you suppress the likeness of God? That almost be like self-hate.
Well, almost, well,
Be like
or
what?
it could be
Self-hate.
or that you can never measure up.
Well, I think,
expectations of others.
isn't that part of racism too also of sorts? I mean, that comes to my mind.
Well, if you suppress for others, yeah, but if you within yourself,
Oh,
how
It's
do you
very,
suppress?
two
Yeah,
different, very
how do you suppress the likeness of God in yourself? And that would be almost like self-hate. That would be almost like, well, I'm going to deny everything that God has made me to be, and I'm going to go do something else.
Well, to be like others, not with that
So-
kind of pressure. Coming in,
So it might be like peer pressure.
right. Because, no, like Peter. I mean, you know, he denied Christ, basically denied me.
Well, you know, I was thinking Jonah as well. Jonah's like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
You know,
and he was mad at God because God wouldn't do what he said. I think those Ninevites, you need to smack them, smite them all, smote.
yeah, smoke them all.
Right? And he says, and I knew God, I knew you wouldn't do it. I knew you would end up being light on.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what I mean. It would be that real spiteful. Be like the, what was his name? Captain Dan and Lieutenant Dan. Forrest Gump. He's screaming at God on top of the mast. You know.
That's a good point.
Yeah, this is a good thing.
I don't have to be moral.
I like that.
Even with racism, it's obviously suppressing it in others, but to be that way, you have to suppress it within yourself. To feel that way outwardly, because God is calling you to something better, but because of fear or whatever reason, you're going to suppress the likeness of love and others within yourself. So yeah, that's what I mean. Those things. It's if you're going to suppress it in others, then it's the part of you that you're having to suppress.
It's good.
Deep, deep.
Well, it is. I think, you know, when I thought about what we said at Genesis, I mean, we've all heard these stories as children. How hard can it be? But I mean, this is where it all began. This is where it all got screwed
So I
up.
have a question. Kind of got past it. So, studying science, the human body is more water than dirt. So how do we support that we were formed out of the earth? When science will say, no, the body is, I don't know, 80% water, blah, 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 blah. Help me understand that.
I can give my answer and you give your answer, because I know you got an answer.
I don't.
Well, it starts out with dirt, but then came the fulfillment of that dirt to become with a soul. But it's not just dirt and God's breath. It started out with dirt, and then it begins to flourish into it. Water then was drawn up into it.
Because of the moisture that was in the land, that thing?
As also as a beginning, yes, but also as the dirt becomes a body. Then if you were there watching it, I think it would be very possible that as he's breathing his breath into it, you could see water just starting to come
Kind
toward
of like
that
a
dirt.
sandcastle. You can't form those things without there being moisture.
And it draws, and you would actually be able to see this moisture coming together into that dirt and then starting to become human.
He blew, and the body was formed. So there's something in his breath.
Yeah, but like I said, obviously, the remains are a good example. There's not very much left when the water's gone, but everything that was you is now in that little thing. Because, and where does all the minerals, like all the elements that you're made out of, where's it coming from? The ground. I think that's what they talk about when they say dirt.
It could also be poetic.
Yeah,
Like,
that would be my take on it.
I've read another author I've read on this did it in a poetic way and said God was elbows deep in the mud, like kind of explaining. It's a picture of how he made us. He was elbows deep in his creation. I don't know that.
I mean, I never thought of myself as a tadpole nor a monkey, so I'm just letting you know.
Yeah, in other parts of scripture, it said that God is a potter and we are the clay. Right, so there's
Potter's wheel, you have to have that water.
Yeah, he's shaping us, and not quite sure how all that works.
That's a really good.
But that would be my answer, because this is not a scientific textbook. We have no idea
It's
how.
not literal.
Yeah, well,
Dirt, no water.
yeah, we have no idea how he did it.
Tim Mackey would point out that, you see, there's this chaos. And when God holds back the chaos, that's the reason why aren't we thrown off the surface of the earth as it spins with this centrifugal force? Well, it's because of gravity. Well, why do we have gravity? Because God created it. He holds the chaos in order. But if he lets go of it, then it starts to rain for 40 days. And actually, when he calls the chaos into order, there's the dirt. And then he says, water, get it. Dirt, get it. Breath, breathe into it. And all this starts to come together to form.
Yeah, thanks.
Also, what, visually,
Yeah,
what he's talking about is, after all, he's talking about the creation of the earth. Okay, and we are the crowning creation of that process. So it would just be natural for it to visually, poetically, as you say, basically, this final creation comes from literally the parts of the earth.
yeah.
Which is, gravity and all these others. That's always interesting though. So if I'm at the South Pole and I'm looking up, am I really looking down? Close.
That's a great question.
This could be looking
And
at.
would you really be saying,
I don't know.
like, okay, southeast?
That's
At a
close.
23.5-degree angle. That's what the tilt is. Pointing around at 23,000 miles an hour.
Who feels inspired to close us in prayer? Because it's time. Is your stepdad still with us?
Yeah. Yeah,
He gave up.
He gave up. Probably couldn't do much.
Too much rubbish. Okay. All right. Well, Who feels inspired? Colleen, my better half. My better half. Would you close for us? And then next week, we're back at the Painters Lounge. We're having worship. Rob Payne is leading us. We'll finish up on a little bit of discussion on this first lesson in Genesis. We'll have Lord's Supper and just a time of fellowship together, talking about those things.
Where are we going to be Tuesday?
Tuesday, we are, I believe, at Jobot. We're going to start to distribute those.